Welcome to the stage, Hamish Mackenzie, our own advisory board member and the moderator for this session.
Many thanks, Lucian. So whether you're just starting your day, just finishing it, or somewhere in between, welcome. My name is Hamish Mackenzie. Thanks for joining us for this session, which is Brownfield to Agentic, retrofitting plants with a trust layer, sponsored today by Adlib Software. As usual, please go ahead and tell us who you are, where you are in the chat, so we get a feel for who's joining us. And over the next hour or so, of course, we're going to be getting some great insights from our speakers as usual, but we also want to hear from you, most important people in the room, our audience. So please do get your questions into the Q&A function. Don't put them in the chat or I'll probably lose them. So get them in the Q&A function. Don't wait till the end. As soon as something pops into your head, get your question in and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the session. All right, so let's focus on the topic for today then. Manufacturers aren't struggling to generate AI insights anymore. They're struggling to trust them. That's the thesis that we're going to discuss today in this session. And in brownfield environments, we have critical data still living in a lot of unstructured documents. And when that data isn't accessible or traceable, AI stalls and teams tend to fall back on manual processes, checks, rework, and all the risks associated with that, which AI is supposed to help address. And so in this session, what we're going to try and do is show how leading manufacturers are trying to close that gap and transforming messy multi-format data into validated AI-ready data that can really safely power agentic workflows within the manufacturing environment. And so we're going to learn, for example, why up to 80% of manufacturing data today is still unusable for AI, how to convert engineering quality and compliance documents into structured, traceable inputs for PLM, MES, ERP, and AI systems, and what it really takes to move from AI pilots to reliable production-grade automation on the shop floor. Because ultimately, the point of this session is we want to help you move your AI initiatives from insight to real action. All right, so that's the session. That's what we're going to cover. Let's introduce our guests now. First of all, we have Chris Huff, who is CEO of Adlib Software. He's a growth-focused SaaS executive with a track record of scaling PE and VC-backed enterprise software companies. He's a former CEO at Base64.ai and Chief Strategy and Growth Officer at Tungsten Automation, leading strategy, product, AI, go-to-market, marketing, and partnerships. He also co-led Deloitte's US public sector intelligent automation practice, and he's a former major in the US Marine Corps. So thank you for joining us again, Chris. Then we have Anthony Vigliotti, who's CPO of Adlib Software. He has over 20 years of experience in business workflow and intelligent document processing. Prior roles at Kofax, Nuance, Notable Solutions, and Xerox across product management, alliance and partner management, and product development. And he has a BS in mechanical engineering and an MS in information technology, both from Rochester Institute of Technology. Welcome again, Anthony. Then we have Mathias Oppelt, who's VP, Head of Customer and Startup Driven Innovation at Siemens. 16 years of experience at Siemens Digital Industries across strategy, project business, product management, and software development. And he currently leads a customer and startup-driven innovation and development unit focused on the future of industrial operations. He previously headed up the Simulation and Digitalization Center, leading development of simulation products and customer-specific solutions. And his educational background is in engineering science, mechatronics, and technology management. Finally, a few words about me. Hamish, I'm a former IDC analyst. I've been running my consulting practice here in Munich, Germany since 2006, and I consult on multiple aspects of go-to-market strategy for a wide range of B2B technology scale-ups, startups, and my focus is really on giving them the focus and the clarity and the execution leverage they need to turn complex technology into reliable growth. So if you want to find out more about what I do, please look me up on LinkedIn. I'm the only Hamish in Munich as far as I know, or one of the only ones, so it shouldn't be too hard to find me. And with all of that said, don't forget your questions into the Q&A tab, and we're going to now get into it. Before we start the discussion, though, I want to bring up our first poll. So if Paul, you could bring up our first poll question. There it is. Actually, I thought that was going to be a different one, but okay, we'll go with that one. What's the biggest barrier to scaling industrial AI beyond pilots in your organization? So please choose one of those options. And while you're doing that, we'll start getting into the discussion, and then we can use the results of this to get some context. So Paul, if you just bring the results up in about 10 seconds or so, that would be great. And I want to start off with Mathias. So let's look at where does where does AI fundamentally fail at the moment in the industrial environments? It might be a bit of a negative place to start, but we're going to move on to the positives and the solutions later on. But what must an industrial foundation model do differently to safely influence real engineering and product decisions in a manufacturing environment, Matthias?
Thanks, Hamish, for that question. And I think you managed to make a turn, and from the very negative start, where does it fail? So what do we need to do differently in
Yeah,
industry? And we talk, everybody talks about AI so much, and we use AI in our day-to-day life. So in so many different sessions, I think we all have been through the maybe past years and being at panels and discussing about AI. But I would bet today everybody is using some kind of AI in their day-to-day life. And it's primarily, I would say, it's text-based AI. So LLMs, the open AIs, ChatGPTs, Claude, and all these kinds of models. So they are really fundamentally trained to generate plausible answers, and to predict what is a meaningful next word, and so on and so forth. But plausibility is not sufficient enough in industry. So it really needs to be reliable. It needs to be proven that what is the predicted outcome actually not only is plausible and makes sense, that it's also not a harm to basically put that into the industrial practice. So I think this is the one thing, the trust, the reliability, which in an industrial context is fundamentally different than what we have in, oh, it's just getting a sentence wrong in an email, so I can correct it, but potentially nobody dies from that. So in
yeah.
industries that could have significant causes at the end. So we need to work on the reliability, trustworthiness of AI fundamentally if we bring it really down to the shop floor. The other end is that we all have some kind of a technical and engineering background, being at least on that panel, but also I think a lot of people in the audience. If you think back what you have trained at school, university, and so on, pretty early on, you learn to basically create drawings, and to translate your message, what kind of system you would like to build, you would like to create, what is the part there, what's the tolerances, and so on. So that's a message of communication. So we are communicating beyond words. So it's a modality in that kind of sense. And so the industrial AI and what you mentioned with the industrial foundation model, that needs to be able to speak the language of industry, the language of engineers. So understand drawings, understand simulation models, and so on. And so understand that context and make reasons for that. So it's two things: being reliable on the one hand side, and being able to speak the language of industry on the other hand side, I think, which is fundamentally to really bring it from general purpose AI to industrial grade AI.
Okay, and we'll come back in a minute to talk about what are the more specific things that are fundamentally broken, which are perhaps stopping us to get to the place where we need to be with all this. Before we come to that though, Chris, I wanted to come to you. So if, as I kind of stated at the beginning in our hypothesis now, the industry is pushing towards action. So AI is not just recommending things to do, it's actually we're attempting to use it to drive decisions and workflows. So from your perspective, you're seeing what's going on in the market. How real is that shift today within industrial environments in particular?
Yeah, so I think this is a really important framing, Hamish. But what Matthias said sort of was a good lead-in for this, because
Mhm.
as we're expecting the solutions that we play with on a daily basis that we're calling AI now to do more than ever before it was just sort of like go and get my data and bring it to me. And then we evolved into, okay, generate some insights from the data that you fetched for me. And now we're taking it to a point where not just fetch the data, generate insights, but also take action. And so the level of risk and liability goes up the further you sort of go down that value chain. And so there's absolutely more at risk, which means that you need to have greater degrees of accuracy and confidence in the underlying data layer. And that's where we focus at Adlib is that data layer. So as this industry is really shifting from what we're calling like systems of insight to systems of action, what we're seeing, and I think your first poll showed that very much so, is that it's very uneven. I think it was almost split across all four of the options. So it
Yeah.
wasn't like the cohort here knows where the issue is. It's spread out across all of them. So again, there's a lot of areas or attack vectors. So to your question of like where is real today, we see it primarily in adjacent functions. Take procurement, contract review, supplier onboarding, regulatory filings, but it's a lot of the back office quality work. So we're seeing AI agents that don't just recommend a next step, but they're actually taking the next step. And we used to develop software with human in the loop taken into account. And what you're seeing a lot of software companies, including Adlib, do now is we're putting humans at the end of the loop. And to the extent possible, where humans used to play in the loop, we want AI agents that are doing that in a very autonomous way. So you still have humans serving as like the gate review, the quality check, but we want autonomous agents now that they can have context. They can understand how to handle not just the happy path, but they can understand the exceptions and how they should take action on those exceptions. But on the flip side, maybe where it isn't real yet, anywhere AI would directly influence maybe a physical process or a regulated decision on the shop floor. And it's not because the models aren't capable, it's because of the ground truth, which means things like engineering specs, SOPs, batch records, change orders. I mean, you pick it. They're not structured, they're not validated, therefore, they're not traceable enough to bet operations on. So the honest answer, the net of it is agentic AI is real for, I would call it high volume, lower stakes work today. It's not yet real for high stakes, low volume decisions.
Mhm.
And that's where the humans are playing today, is in that high stakes, low volume decisions where a wrong answer means a recall, a safety event. Again, risk and liability is just too high.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And so you mentioned risk a couple of times there, and Matthias, and I think, connected to that is this issue of trust. So Matthias, if I could come back to you and ask you to just dig in a bit more deeply there in terms of, what is fundamentally broken around data quality, documentation, and traceability that means that trust isn't there at the moment.
It seems like I'm always getting the question, what fails, what's broken? But
We'll try and change that later.
that's fine. So I would like to build on just what Chris said, that
Yeah.
it's not about only that it needs to sound somehow nice what the answer is and it sounds right. It needs to be proven to be right, and it's about accountability. So who is actually taking which decisions, and if we want to take the agents to take more decisions and reach a level of autonomy and increase that. I think there's fundamentally, if we start, what is the basis for decisions? The basis for decision is data, and it starts with the training data, which is not that yet in the sufficient amount we would like to have it. So there are so many cat pictures out there on the internet. So I can train an algorithm very sufficiently to identify a cat on a picture. But the industrial data, which I need for industrial use cases and decision making and to train a model, is not at all in the pure amount, even we put everything together, existing. So we have less data. And then this less data is also scattered across all these different kinds of small little data silos across different kind of companies and then different departments and so on. So it's really, really distributed. So the first thing we would need to solve is to say, okay, how do I get a sufficient amount of data to train, to validate? Because I could also argue synthetic data generation might do the trick, a little bit of simulation, but not fully. So I will always rely on a certain set of well-curated real data to train, to validate my models on. We need to lean in all together to say, okay, this is data we could all curate together to train these models. But we need to overjump the hurdles that we all basically start to collaborate and applying that instead of hiding my individual data there. So, and then it's about what's the quality of data I producing in, so to say, in real time and feeding that into that model. And this also needs to be curated. So, and Chris also put it nicely that if that is not of sufficient quality, how is that decision well based? So what I mean is, first, there's a problem in terms of connectivity. So do I even have connectivity down to the shop floor that I get that data up? So do I have then context information that it's not just a time series stream of information, which I can relate to anything. So I need to have the context. What kind of assets are there? What is happening? What is the machine? And so on and so forth, that I can make some reasoning, some context of that data, and then take some decisions. So we have, I think, one problem in setting the models up with a sufficient amount of training data, then the connectivity and accessing to the shop floors that I could basically take my decisions based on the data which is coming. And last but not least, we need to have actually this accountability in terms of models. And there will be, for a certain period of time, as more crucial as more often humans in the loop to take the final decision. So there will also be, at a certain point in time, we reach the problem that we need to have very experienced decision makers. So people who have 30 years experience in that particular industry to judge what the prediction of that model is, if it's right or wrong, and if the decision can be executed. What if these people all retired, and then anybody who has no experience should just accept the proposal from the model? That will be an interesting case, because hopefully by then, we should also be actually have the model be in the position to take the decision, or to at least validate it against something like a digital twin. But we can talk about that also a bit later.
Yeah, and it would also mean that you then wouldn't have to hire back the retired people on twice what they were earning before as consultants, because they're the only ones who remember or know how it should work. So that's how it works in banking software anyway, I can tell you that.
No, it worked also in industry. I just have an
Yeah.
example from last week to share it. Somebody needed to hire back an 86-year-old guy to basically avoid and get rid of a shutdown, which cost 1.5 million, because it basically was a line shutdown for 4 weeks on all these old legacy stuff which is installed. And this is the software we currently run on.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're gonna move on to talk in a bit more detail about the whole brownfield aspect in a second. All right, and we're gonna get Anthony involved as well. So before we just move on to the next section, Paul, can you bring up the next poll for us, please? So how confident are you allowing an AI to drive real operational decisions? Fully confident, somewhat confident, not confident, or not considering it yet? So I think this will give us a bit of context about where people are in their own journey on this. I'll just give us another 10 seconds to answer that, and then that might give us some context as well. So Paul, could you give us the results? So yeah, not too many fully confident, a lot of people in the middle, but not too many not even considering it yet. So I guess that's maybe what we expected to see, but we can maybe use that as context within the next part of the discussion. All right, so I'm going to come to Anthony in a second. First, Chris, let's talk about that reality and that brownfield reality. Why do the systems of action that we've been talking about, why is that a particular problem in the brownfield scenario?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the plants today and the 86-year-old being brought back in that Mathias was alluding to, I think is a perfect example. Like the plants running today were never designed for AI. They were designed for production, just get it done. And that largely was, human ingenuity, figuring it out. We wanted to, document that as best as possible in SOPs, knowledge manuals, and things like that. So the institutional knowledge, think, engineering drawings, validated procedures, equipment manuals, supplier specs, they sit in PDFs, scans, OEM binders, SharePoint sites, and in some cases, literal like filing cabinets, and across multiple sites. It's not even like it's consolidated. That said, today, every manufacturer that we talk to, all of our enterprise customers, they want agentic AI.
Hmm.
And if you look at what the market is saying there's going to be 89 billion of agent spend this year,
Hmm.
but 60% of those projects are going to get abandoned. 60% of those projects will get abandoned. That's a lot of waste.
Hmm.
And if you look at the root cause in the analyst reports, and this is the Gartner report, 90% of the operational truth is in a brownfield plant.
Hmm.
So it lives in documents that AI just can't read. And so, how do you take that very unstructured mess, that complex data, and turn those documents into data products? And again, that's what we specialize in, but that becomes the fuel for this AI. So, to start with the AI as opposed to like, what does the AI actually need to do its job? But so I think pilots are stalling in a few very, very predictable places. The first one is ingestion. This is the MISI multi-format documents, Hamish, that you actually opened a session talking about, but multi-format documents that basically resist like clean extraction because it's so messy and complex. Think of
Yeah.
documents that have multiple layers, an image layer, a data layer, a text layer. Like that's very complex. You will not find putting an LLM on that to work, period. Anthony does demos on this all the time. And it's not Adlib or LLM, it's Adlib and LLM. That's how you solve for this gap. The next one is around just validation. And this is where, engineers just won't trust an output that they can't trace back to its sourced page, version, but whatever that source of truth needs to be. If they can't trace it back to it, they're likely going to be hesitant to make, plant and operational decisions on it. And I would maybe put another one in there, and that's around integration. And this is where I think structured data needs to flow very cleanly into the PLMs, the ERPs, the QMSs, in a way that those systems actually accept. So those are, and there's probably another list of two or three that I could go down, but I don't want to take up too much time. But like that's where I would really start to focus on in terms of why, systems of action are, consistently stalling is because those top three things just aren't getting addressed.
Hmm. Okay, fantastic. So, Anthony, sorry it's taken a little bit to get to you, but it's now time to get into the weeds. And I know you've recently written about treating documents in regulated industries as evidence rather than just inputs, what we typically call inputs. So, if we're doing that, then how does that fundamentally change how AI systems should be designed and governed in for the industrial environment?
So you're probably the one person who's read my articles and blogs. That's great to hear.
I'm sure
Um,
there's a few.
no, obviously, in my opinion, I think how you frame the problem certainly should influence the design of your system. And what we often see is when you're using AI, you often look to the point of interference, like something's not working, and I'm going to focus only on that point that's not working. Or largely, your problem is downstream from that. You should have been focusing on this much earlier in the process.
Mhm.
So, and to help people understand how this might apply, I try to pick, examples that are relevant and people would recognize. And I chose this evidence word, of my love of Boston Legal and Suits and any show you've watched on TV where you see people trying to submit evidence. And if you look up like just the word evidence, a lot of these things that make up attributes of evidence really do apply and help to the way you onboard documents into AI and the system's design. The first one is relevant. Is the piece of information that the LLM is considering or AI is considering relevant to the problem at hand? You know, the second one is it reliable and credible? I mean, word for word, the evidence must be trustworthy, accurate, and from a solid source, right? The next one is authentic. Like, can it be verified? Right? And the last one I'll point out is chain of custody. So Matthias and Chris have already pointed out a lot of these things, but these are the elements that make up a good system design such that you get the most accurate, reliable, predictable outcome from AI systems. And the other thing we haven't yet mentioned or touched on yet is we're constantly trying to balance accuracy, trust, reliability, whatever words you want to use there, against token cost, right? Against context window. And what we often see in many of these projects and things that we're dealing with is you can get to an accurate outcome, but in many cases you overrun the context window that your AI system is capable of. So what we often see is the AI system is having to make choices. I would have pulled in this document, but I don't have the context window to support it. So it started to like clip, important bits of information that are relevant to a potential business outcome. And when you're talking about insight, when you were dealing with your chatbot and the insight gave you something that was questionable, okay, there was probably a disclaimer right there saying don't trust it anyway. But when you're taking action and you're now clipping relevant bits of information because of a context window or token overrun, that causes real problems in outcomes. So I guess my message to you is if you treat these documents as evidence and take those 3 or 4 attributes that I measured against and actually design your systems such that you're getting to relevant, reliable, authentic, and chain of custody, you'll have a much better outcome at the end of the day.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Anthony. So Mathias, at the risk of pigeonholing you again towards negativity, I'm gonna let you talk about what's wrong, but also then perhaps suggest a few solutions as well. So, as we already heard from Chris, a lot of AI initiatives either fail or are successful, but then don't really scale beyond the pilot which supposedly proved their success, right? So, and a lot of times the assumption might be that it's about the technology, but is it really? Or are we talking about a lack of shared standards, a lack of common semantics, and maybe even the people aspect, a lack of willingness to collaborate? That's often when I'm dealing with these kind of projects, is the people aspect is also extremely important. So could you just talk a little bit around that?
So definitely, and it's always easy to blame technology, to say, okay, the technology is a problem, the model is not accurate enough, and then everything would be done. I think it's a mix of all of it. Yes, what Anthony described well with the context window. Can I capture everything of information? What is the traceability of information? Can I explain what we call about explainable AI, that I really have the evidence, what is being generated on what solid foundation in terms of data. All that needs to be provided to have these trusted industrial grade AI. But this is something, and the foundation model, what can be worked on? And if it would be technology alone, it would be easy. Then we need to look at the organizational dimensions. So, and this is, our organizations are not built to basically are completely automated by agents to have access to all the kinds of data. So it is an organization, but also some kind of I would say, policy topic. So do I really disclose all my information, share it, unless there's a good reason not to do it? And across the different departments to start reasoning and to optimizing the process. Is it meaningful to put there an automation into whatever kind of task, or is it more wisely to basically rethink from an AI first perspective that kind of process, how it's supposed to be done? So I think this is fundamentally, it could also change the way we actually work. Right now we still think, okay, we are automating human tasks, but this was thought to compensate whatever kind of these processes are made to compensate for whatever limitations humans have. So, and now we're automating processes for agents which are not as humans. So I expect them to be able to read 10,000 of pages in a few minutes, and then not neglect any kind of information, extract the information which is relevant. I cannot request that task to and give it to a human. So, so these organizational rethinking in terms of processes could open up completely new dimensions. And you brought up one very important dimension, Hamish, which is people. So, and even I was last week in Silicon Valley and talking to a lot of startups and tech companies and so on. And even they say, we don't know what model will be the leading one in 2 weeks. So, or there was a funny quote, oh yes, that was 3 months ago. So imagine this is 3 months ago. in a lifetime of a manufacturing plant. So this pace of change is really overwhelming to us as humans. Yes, change was always there and we are adapting to it. But am I willing, am I trusting that system, working with it? From my own experience, I could say working with all these agents had also some kind of addiction to really work your way through and give the next commands out there and see how well they can work. And this is great enhancements, but we need to learn how to leverage that. We need to become really open in adapting that new technology. And it's all about mindset. It's seeing all not only problems, seeing opportunities out there, but stay in also asking, allowing ourselves the question, what is really the USP of a human, or what makes us really a human being? So and how do we scale that kind of capabilities in the age of that I can automate a lot of more things that we didn't thought in the back in the past would have been was possible to automate. And I think this is an interesting question. I also don't have the ultimate answer, and we could debate it for the next half hour or even longer philosophically. What is really the essence of being human, and how do we scale it by the use of AI and make it even a little bit more human-centric and not just taking the human completely out of the loop? I have enough things to do I could enjoy in life than basically sorting any kind of crappy data and try to feed it to agents. But this job of reasoning what we do, and that job of creating the evidence, what Anthony said with data is and documents are the evidence. This is a skill. We put so much thinking into that in building that evidence and documents, which is a fundamental asset also to leverage the AIs. So generating that evidence, curating that data set, maintaining that data set to keep it up to date, that I could then leverage the power of agents. It's definitely something I see. It will be imminently necessary to also have humans there also in future.
Yeah, Matthias, Hamish, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump
Yeah,
in
of
here
course.
because Matthias
Yeah.
mentioned something, and I love the people aspect of this because you're right. That's something that often goes overlooked. And I think we underestimate, I think as leaders, we underestimate the workforce and the desire that they actually have to evolve, up level themselves. And anytime we have an innovation super cycle like the one we're having right now, right? We had cloud, we had mobile, we have these innovation super cycles, and we just have to acknowledge, like pick our head up from our daily work and say, like, we're in this innovation super cycle. And whenever you're in that, I think it's very healthy to take leaders aside, whiteboard. If we were to build whatever your business is, your line of business that you're responsible for, but if we were to build it from the ground up today, given the innovation super cycle that we're in, how would we do it? And so that's something, just to be completely transparent, Anthony and I did for our platform called Transform. And what one of the key, and so typically in those conversations, design principles come out of those conversations. Just high level, directionally correct, how is this moving relative to the path that we were on? And so directionally, there will be more agents, AI agents interacting with our software than humans interacting with our software on a go forward basis. And so then we said, okay, if directionally that's a design principle, what does that mean then for our roadmap for the feature sets and things like that? And then all of a sudden, Anthony socializes that with his product and engineering teams, and they don't go like, oh man, this is terrible. Like, I used to just do coding all day, and that's what I want to do is just write code. No, they came back and they were super excited. It's like it unlocks this innovation valve that we as managers have sort of like shut off to an extent and just told people like, hey, I gave you this tool 10 years ago, just use it. We're paying an annual SaaS bill for it, just use it. And so it's really amazing, this innovation unlock when managers truly understand the innovation super cycle that they're in and then put it to their teams around, hey, if we were designed from the ground up today, taking
Mhm.
this into account, how would we be better as a business? How could we be better? So Matthias, I just wanted to put that out there. Like, I'm really glad you touched on that. I think it's really critical.
And I like that. And I also would like to um, just highlight that people are very eager also to that innovation, also down in the shop floor. And to just mention one example, in our own manufacturing sites, even in Germany. So we did recently a pilot with some humanoid destacking, pelleting, and so on. All the workers were so interested in that and said, "Oh, that's so cool. Can we also use it to do that task, that task, that task?" There was not the fear to say, "Oh no, I don't want to see these guys here."
That's
So
right.
there's really, I sense that now also with all the agents work out there in the office space, people really start thinking that direction and think, I want to be part of that journey. So that could also be a lot of fun.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a lot to unpack there. First of all, that was the closest I've ever come in all the years I've been doing this of getting into an existential discussion about the nature of humanity.
Oh
So
yeah, we can
I
do
think we
that.
need to set up a new session for that one. But I'm pleased we almost got there. And I just wanted to also reinforce your point about potentially having to rethink processes. So like a year ago, we were all talking, or I was certainly talking to my clients about, let's start low-hanging fruit. Where can we save time and money using AI? How do we do what we're already doing faster or better? Whereas what we're seeing now is that AI is actually enabling us or making us, demanding of us that we actually rethink how we're doing things in the first place, right? And so it's not just about automating and accelerating what we already have; it's about rethinking. And then the last point I wanted to just say when you were talking about we don't know what the best model is going to be in 2 weeks. To my understanding, it's also the case that the people who built the models don't actually understand how the models are coming up with results as good as they are delivering, which is amazing, also
Mhm.
faintly terrifying. But I think we need to be cognizant of that as well as we discuss this. There's still a lot of unknowns. Anyway, to get back to kind of brass tacks, as it were, to get back to some reality. So brownfield, if we're saying that brownfield is the problem, Chris, what actually needs to change to unlock these systems in terms of driving action at scale? And then I also wanted to bring Anthony in on that and talk about, in the old days, we used to talk about rip and replace, and is that really the answer, or is it actually more about adding new layers, standards, or approaches? Because realistically, it's rip and replace is not, just in lots of other areas of IT, it's not realistic in a lot of cases. But anyway, Chris, if you could just start off by talking about brownfield, what do we actually need to change in those environments?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna stick with the positive, with the good vibes.
Yes.
Like, because change isn't bad. And so, but the very positive is that I don't think there is a need for a rip and replace. That's not what we're seeing anyways with our
Yeah.
customers. But the brownfield constraint is real. But it isn't actually like the blocker. The blocker that we've seen has been basically treating documents as the end of a process instead of as a strategic data source. Again, our mantra is that we turn documents into data products for AI. And so like that has to be at the beginning, not at the end. But all too often we see the shiny toy brought in, thrown on a current process, and then the outputs aren't trusted and they wonder why. And then they just, if they have the perseverance to stick with it, they end up finally getting, to the treasure trove of documents that needs to be cleaned up. So turning documents into data products fit for AI is likely a good first step. And that's how we see primarily the manufacturers just elevating their unstructured content to what we would say is like a first-class data layer. So the same care, the governance, the accessibility that you give data that's setting in your ERP, or even like a data lake. So that means classifying it, extracting the right entities, validating against whatever the source of truth or the master is, and making it queryable. All of that needs to take place. The second area is typically around every piece of structured data has to carry like provenance with it. If an agent recommends, I don't know, a parameter change or a supplier swap, an engineer needs to like click on something and see the source spec, the version, the approval trail in seconds. No provenance, no trust, and no trust, no autonomy for that agent. So that's sort of like the lineage that we pull out. And I think, when this is done well, it becomes a trust layer that sits between, it's called like the messy reality of brownfield documents and this clean expectation of a modern AI system. And if that's again done well and done right, I think the winners in 26 won't be the ones with the best models. They'll be the ones who built a defensible trust layer first and then applied agents and AI to that data.
Okay. Anthony, would you like to add something on that?
Yeah, the question was a little bit more about rip and replace, so I'll kind of
Yeah,
focus my attention there.
exactly.
In my, when you introduced me, you may have referenced mechanical engineering, and at
Yep.
Xerox back in the day, I actually was a mechanical engineer working on a toner assembly line. So I have, my initial roots are in manufacturing, and I can speak firsthand to this very complicated, messy diagram which shows all the integrated systems that we would all love to replace, but you never can. And really, I think that's a reality even today. In these brownfield environments, there's literally a list of legacy systems that we will be keeping that will likely still be here, maybe even 2036, let alone tomorrow, that we need to figure out how to work with. You mentioned earlier, Hamish, the new models, maybe a new one coming next week. That may be true. It probably is true. But we found to date is even though the models are changing, the requirements for a good, healthy data pipeline doesn't change. Okay. So getting your documents ready for AI in this world is more important than ever before. So when we look at a document at Adlib, we don't really care if it's a standard operating procedure or a QA evaluation. What we're looking for are the key elements in that document. Is it of a handwriting? Does it have check marks? Is there a diagram? Or is it an embedded Visio process flow? Are there CAD drawings? Are they 2D and 3D? And what we're able to do is, decompose those documents to its base layer such that we have the best way to extract the value out of those documents and the best approach to set context and process for the agents and large language models to get it right. And if you do this earlier enough, you have the ability to solve some real world AI problems. Chris mentioned provenance and citations. You can't get the provenance and citations at the end. That's something you need to insert at the very beginning, making certain that you have captured that lineage and the audit trail from point one. If you're talking about like retrieval, with a RAG or a AI chat with documents type system, if you're trying to retrieve information on embedded pictures or a CAD file, that's not something you would expect to work at the point of AI chat. That's something that you would need to have considered when you're actually embedding the diagram or embedding the document, right? Once again, bringing the process forward. So if you're trying to solve them at the point of interference, it's likely too late. And around this brownfield integration of existing legacy technology, you don't have to throw away the legacy technology. You just have to figure out a way to extract it such that it has like a machine readable digital twin where the context is maintained, where the metadata that may be required to pass along comes from the system, but provided in a machine readable format that's easy for AI to consume. So you're not running up against context windows or token utilization challenges, and you're also speeding up the processing. And oh, by the way, getting a better and accurate outcome because you're giving something that was once unstructured, now a structured vibe to the AI system and its pipeline. Okay.
All right, fantastic. So we're going to move on to the final section now. Paul, could you bring up the last poll, please? So if an AI-driven system made a wrong decision tomorrow, could you trace it back to source data and defend it? And we'll just give people 10 seconds or so to answer that one. And then we'll move on to the last part of the discussion. I think as a result of that technical hitch, we've lost a lot of the questions, but hopefully we still have a couple to get to by the end. So anyway, could you show us the result, Paul? There we go. So fully traceable, just 9%, again, partially 35%. So we're looking at nearly 2/3 of people, or certainly over half who can't reliably do that or don't know whether they can or not. All right, so let's going back to, I guess, more towards the human aspect again. Everyone talks about closing the loop between AI, simulation, automation, but Matthias, who's actually ready to take responsibility when a digital decision, AI-driven decision, directly affects physical operations? Where does that responsibility lie?
So that's a very good question. And it's also, I think, not a very easy answer to say, okay, that's with Chris, or that's with Hamish, or this is Matthias. But I only mentioned basically human names now because how can I blame and hold an agent fully accountable for it, for the decisions they made? So I think for a very significant amount of time, we will stay the decision makers or the responsible parts to basically be accountable for the result. So if I talk about we, I think we as humans, and we will step by step after winning that confidence and trust, seeing that more and more of these decisions I acknowledge the AI is getting right because it works against a nicely curated digital twin, what Anthony also said, and said, okay, this is what was built, what works again, and we trust it. And it's also the harm and the impact a wrong decision could have is maybe limited. So it's all about risk mitigation, risk management. So safety becomes a new dimension to build up whatever kind of safety metrics is and so on, to say which kind of agent can make decision, which authority do they get. And I think that whole security discussion becomes an additional dimension. So what agent gets what's access. So in all the discussion about open claw and so on, and I integrated that into my business backend or not, if it starts to basically consuming not all your token space, but also doing crazy stuff on your behalf because you gave them all your credentials. That's, I think, maybe not the way to go. I think there will be one significant lever, which is interesting because for me, different streams of technology now come together, and they are coming into a crossing point. Now we talked so much about AI, and many years ago, we started to talk about simulations, physics-based simulations, equation-based simulations, all that kind of stuff. Then it came big data, AI models, which also do simulate, predict certain kind of futures. So as we are dealing in industrial context, in a physical environment, I think the evolvement which we made in the space of building really a physical digital twin, a replica of your production site, and now a decision support engine with AI and the curated data sets and so on, all that coming together, I would first close the loop and saying, your proposal, dear agent, you run it against my virtual plant, my virtual simulation. If that proves to be rock solid and working, then you can apply it in real life, but not before that proof point, that validation point is basically ticked off. And I think that's a significant advantage we can leverage, as there was also so much evolvement and these technologies now hitting each other. So closing the loop first with your virtual plant, with your digital twin, and then bring it over to the real world. That's, I think, what will make a fundamental change to increase step by step the confidence in that decision making of the agents, and then scale that safely.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. Anthony, your thoughts on who should own the risk when, in terms of systems of action, when a wrong decision gets made in a brownfield environment?
Well, if a wrong decision is made, it's certainly not me. It's the honest answer right now is that nobody owns it cleanly. There are a couple of companies that I've run across that do this exceptionally well, and many, haven't really even given it some thought. I'll take a more technical spin to the answer.
Mhm.
Most of these AI agents and AI technologies aren't standalone technologies. You're integrating them. We already had that conversation around, some of the brownfield technologies that exist. And behind the scenes, there's typically an orchestration layer. And this orchestration layer is helping to do that integration and the handoffs of information. And I would suggest at that time of orchestration, you give some really hard thought as to how you're also handling errors, issues, right? How do you have proper error logging? Are you doing appropriate callbacks across the application so that if something does fail, you know where, what application, what agent potentially got stalled or paused? So I guess the first point of knowing who did something wrong or what did something wrong is to know where actually the problem exists. So the first, line of defense is use your orchestration layer to really help provide single pane of glass coverage around, what agents are doing, not doing, where they're stalled, and how it's working. All right, that's one initial thought. The second thought is if you think about when you bring on a new piece of equipment to the manufacturing floor, I know there's a group of people that get together that are cross-functional that determine, what happens once this thing breaks. What's the escalation path? Where does the documentation reside? Where is the training manual? Who has the contacts to the supplier, right? All that stuff is kind of done in preparation for deploying your new quote unquote hardware, right? Your new machinery. That same level of scrutiny and planning should be done for your AI technology. Just because it's software and doesn't have like a tangible, feel to it, doesn't mean that you should ignore your planning and getting ready to handle the good and the bad with respect to your AI deployments. So I'd leave you with those two potential paths to avoid some of the downfalls of AI and to get back going with it should something go wrong.
Okay, fantastic. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you to just wrap us up. Comment quickly on your thoughts about accountability and risk, and where companies should start really to get that right. And then I want to try and fit in a couple of quick questions if we can before we finish.
Okay, that was a very tactful way of saying hurry up. Got it.
Yes.
Love it. You've done this before. Okay, so this is a question that I think every CEO, ops leader needs to be sitting with right now. I think this wave is going to crest very, very quickly, and you want to be ready for it. So, bottom line is accountability cannot be delegated to a model. I think all three of us agree on that on this panel. The plant manager, quality leader, the CEO, they still own the outcome. AI is simply a tool inside that accountability. It's not a substitute for it. Real life example, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. 10 plus years ago, I ran the automation practice at Deloitte Consulting here in the US, focused on public sector. We had a public sector, a federal client, NASA, it was public. And so it was an at-scale robotic process automation, RPA implementation. They basically, the way they handled the accountability piece became a blueprint for the way that we, Deloitte, sort of, pushed it and advised throughout. And that was simply, we were deploying in their NASA shared service center, which included financial management, supply chain, and IT help desk. And within each one of those three cohorts, it was the same. And what I mean by that is financial managers that were like analysts running a desk, doing a particular set of tasks, developed robotic process automation agents, RPA agents, bots, we called them at the time, to do their work. The individuals were elevated to be financial management bot managers. So they were managing those bots. Those humans were still responsible for those bots, making sure the bots, showed up to work each day, that they did the work, and then quality checking the output of their work.
Yeah.
Fast forward to today with AI agents, I believe it's going to be the same model. Humans will be elevated. They will have AI agents working for them. Across that spectrum of transactional to knowledge, humans just continue to get pushed further to the right around knowledge work, which includes managing whether it's an RPA robot or an AI agent. But that's how I see this accountability, is that it's still going to be on a human, but they will be responsible for not just a human workforce, but also an AI agent digital workforce.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for that. All right, so we're going to have time for one, possibly two questions. So I'm going to start with this one, which I think you probably all have an opinion on. Based on the discussion, can we conclude that companies with sufficiently mature process documentation and a narrowly defined use case funnel are going to be very successful? You know, they're going to outperform other companies who don't have that. I don't know, Chris, do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, I'll be really quick. I would say doesn't guarantee success, but their readiness level is obviously higher than those that do not have well-defined processes.
Mhm.
But again, the primary gate that we see that people struggle with is acknowledging the complexity of the documentation that needs to be turned into data products.
Okay. Matthias?
It's having your right processes in place, having your curated data sets, which you maintain and keep up to date. It's not a one-time exercise. And then solving your connectivity topics. If you have done that and know exactly where you would like to deploy it, you can focus and get it done.
Okay, and Anthony?
Yeah, I think I'm going to trigger on the word enough. Enough may imply a lot. So you'll potentially run into problems where you're overrunning. So having an upstream system that's actually processing your documents to get your pipeline ready to get around the enough problem is something I'd also recommend. Also, it says very narrow, and I saw this in the chat as before the break. Focus, focus, focus. And I think you run a risk with AI that you try to get too much out of it. So if you keep it very narrow, you absolutely will get a better outcome. So just keep that in mind.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, unfortunately, we are out of time now, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. I do apologize again for the slight technical hitch we had in the middle there. Please give us your feedback anyway, and try not to let that influence your score too much if possible. But thanks again for joining us. Thanks to our panelists, of course, for all your insights and knowledge. Thank you again specifically to our sponsors today, Adlib Software. Without companies like yours, we wouldn't be able to do this at all. So we're really grateful for that. Thanks to all the attendees for listening and sending in your questions. We will try to get back to you with answers where we can on those questions. But right now it's time to move to today's next session, which is Predictive Maintenance, How Edge AI Sensing Transforms Manufacturing, sponsored by TDK Sensei. And that's it from me. I'll be back again in an hour. In the meantime, enjoy the next session, and I'll see you later.